really delighted to introduce Carlo Rovelli, who is the author of this absolutely incredible book, 85 Seconds to Midnight, a physicist's argument against rearmament. Thank you all for joining us here today. Just to say that we're recording this, we're going to put it up on YouTube. We're going to be hearing from Carlo. I'm going to be asking Carlo some questions, but then we're going to open up to you, for you to ask questions. So if you don't want to be filmed, just say, but that's how we're planning to do it, so if that's all right with everybody. Okay, good. So this book that Carlo has written, and to say Carlo is a global best-selling author, he's a physicist and he's a philosopher, hence why we are reading a very powerful book. So he's written this book in the tradition of two very critical interventions against war. The Manifesto to the Europeans, which was signed by Albert Einstein in 1914 at the start of the First World War, urging peace. And we know how catastrophic that war was, and so why that manifesto was so important. The second is the Russell-Einstein Manifesto in 1955. And at that time, that was the beginning, really, of the nuclear arms race. Very serious time. And that was calling for the world to put humanity first and to abolish nuclear weapons. So, you know, again, really critical manifesto. And, you know, Carlo's call to action couldn't be more urgent because, you know, the threat of nuclear weapons being used in war is accelerating. We have record levels being spent on nuclear weapons. Political leaders, you know, across the world seem determined to bankrupt our economies, drive us into poverty in order to make us war ready. And in fact, Britain is now the third highest spender in terms of nuclear weapons, now ahead of Russia. So it's a very, you know, serious time, and things are moving rapidly. So I wanted to say, first of all, thank you so much for writing this book. You know, it's such an important contribution to challenging this war narrative that we are surrounded by now. But I also wanted to say thank you for writing such a short book. And I don't mean to be flippant, but I think it's very difficult to write a short book. And I think that, you know, you actually go to the core of the issues that we are facing, and I think its shortness, it creates this starkness, which I think is really exposes so forcefully the challenges that we face today. But it also means you can carry this in your head once you've read it. You've got the arguments. So I think it's, you know, really such a powerful read. So as I say, I'm going to start by kind of asking you just a couple of questions before we open it up to the floor. So, you know, you set the context of this book around the development of the nuclear bomb in, you know, the 1944, 45, you know, during the Second World War. You know, war is actually happening. And, you know, you talk about the lead up to the US dropping 2 atomic bombs on Japan. As you describe it, the burning alive of 200,000 men, women and children in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And this burning alive, you know, comes up again, the real absolute sort of physical, visceral horror of nuclear weapons. Now, the main narrative, I think, in the public domain is actually all about to justify what the US did in terms of developing, testing and dropping these nuclear bombs. This to some extent is starting to shift a bit, thankfully. We know, I think it was polling last year that showed that majority of the population now think that the US had no moral legitimacy to drop these bombs. But certainly, you know, there are two justifications for the dropping, aren't they? And one of those is to save lives, to save American lives, to stop, you know, the US from having to invade. But the other one is the fact that the US had to develop the nuclear bomb before Nazi Germany did. And it seems from, in your book, your view is that German physicists did not think it was rational to build a nuclear bomb, and that it wouldn't actually affect the outcome of the war, whereas the US clearly did. So, you know, in effect, it looks like the US had a sort of different assessment and maybe different motivations for pursuing such a bomb. So, can you talk about that with the microphone?
In the microphone. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for coming. It's being here is completely different than having received questions about this book in other places. Because here, of course, I feel home. I feel between friends, and to some extent, I'm here more to change idea and learning than saying. I have this sign of yours on my bag since ever, and I was wearing it when I was 20 in the 70s, going around the world.
CND sign. Yeah.
The CND sign, exactly. It has always been a reference for me since I went all this time, because of the ideas that you have been defending, and so it's a honor for me to be here. Now to your questions, you mentioned two things: the use of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki is one, and the other thing is development. The decision of the US government to develop the atomic bomb and to do the Manhattan Project to grow it. And I think that with conviction or some hesitation about the second, but with clear conviction about, so some hesitation about the first, but with clear conviction about the second, the common narrative misses crucial points of the story. So let me talk by the historical first, which is the decision to this huge investment that has been the Manhattan Project, which is how the US built the bomb, okay, concretely built the bomb. The motivation for it, explicit, declared, written down, and actually the motivation from many of the people who were there, was always, we have to do it fast, because the Germans are doing it. We don't want Hitler to have an atomic bomb. We should absolutely get faster than him. Remarkably, this was false. Germany was not anywhere close to an atomic bomb, had actually decided not to invest seriously in the development of nuclear weapons, in spite of the fact that the German government knew about the possibility of a super bomb earlier, much earlier than the American ones. What happened in Germany is now well documented. First of all, it's a fact that there were no major program of developing the bomb. The relative money put in the Manhattan Project versus the German investment, the scale is 1 to 1,000, and the number of people working in Germany on things related to nuclear was a few postdoc and students and a few scientists, so of the order of 10th. The United States have 500,000 people working on the project at some point. So it was just incomparable, and the Germans were not anywhere close at that. Why? Because the German government asked the scientists to assess how likely was to actually build a bomb within the likely time the European war ended. Okay? And the answer was completely correct at the light of what has happened later. It's extremely unlikely that we can build a bomb before the end of the war, which is correct. because in fact the Americans, with this colossal investment, could not have a bomb before the end of the war in Europe. And in fact, the first test came several months after the complete surrendering of Germany and Russia in Berlin and so on. So, from a rational point of view, forgetting long-term thinking, moral, ethical, anything, the Germans, scientists had the right evaluation, and the politician took the rational decision, which is in a situation of war, you have to balance your costs, your priorities, and the priority was to win the war with conventional weapons and not to dream about a super weapon. This got completely missed by the so-called Allied, the US and the UK, and the Russians, to some extent because the scientists themselves blew this up. Because this, scientists, and especially European scientists, that had escaped to the German, Italian, Hungarian scientists that had escaped to US, were very afraid of Germany. There was this fear of Germany that was very strong, and a fear of German bomb overwhelming, and the scientists misjudged what their colleague would do. The entire intelligence, the American intelligence, the British intelligence, couldn't see that there was no program for developing a bomb in Germany, which is quite astonishing. In fact, when at the end of the war, when the army, the Allied army was going to Germany, they were expecting to find signs of the development of a nuclear project. There was nothing. There was basically nothing. Now, this is crucial because for a number of reasons. First of all, it shows that it's a colossally aggressive thing, like building a super bomb that can kill hundreds of thousands of people, was motivated by unjustified fear. And I think this is a lesson to bring home. So often we go to war because of fear of the enemy, which at worst is just behaving in some ways because it's afraid of us. So, and often it's just completely unjustified. And second, if nuclear weapon had been developed, if the technology had been developed not in the middle of a very bloody war, maybe we could hope, humans sometimes been reasonable, that it could have been put under international control like we did with biological weapons or chemical weapons. These are all terrifying weapons, which humankind said, wait a minute, we don't do that. We create international things to control them. We have inspector go to the lab. We have a conscience of the scientific community that there are certain things which are not to be done, and so on and so forth. It didn't happen that way, and instead it happened in the middle of a war. Now, what I don't know is how much the American leadership was really believing that there was war, there was a nuclear problem in Germany, which was not the case, or were just thinking at the after war and thinking that the real game was to position itself as a nuclear superpower after the war. Now, about the second historical fact is that the use of the bomb, remember, Germany had surrendered 6 months earlier against Japan in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and that's also the common narrative. I find it very misleading because first of all, this argument, oh, we had to invade Japan, it's a very strange argument. Why a country has to invade another country? I mean, just wars were typically ending. First World War, the way it ended, most wars always ended. At some point, somebody surrendered without the need to go in and take down completely a country. So somehow, the American leadership was able to sell this story that, oh, we have to invade Japan. Okay, why not invade Japan? We had to invade Japan, but unfortunately, we don't want to risk too many human life of our kids to do that. So it's okay to burn alive, as you said, 200,000 Japanese. So we say we can invade the country without even risking the life of our kids, our soldiers. That's a morally undefendable argument, in my opinion. But the situation was far more complex than that, because Japan was trying to surrender, actually. What Japan did not want was an unconditional surrender. They were asking for a negotiation, like Iran or going on, but this, like the First World War ended, a negotiation in which Japan had already been chased out with all the immense territory it had conquered in China, in the Philippines, in Korea. So Japan had expanded, conquered this enormous empire. It was war, and then it was chased back by the Americans, by the Chinese, and it was basically controlling only Japan and a little piece of Manchuria. And Russia, who had not been in war with Japan, there was no war between Russia and Japan until that point, 1945. There was a treaty of non-aggression between the two, in spite of previous clashes in the decades before, which allowed Japan to conquer Asia and allowed Russia to defend itself from the invasion of the Germans. So it was convenient for both of them. Stalin agreed with Roosevelt that after the capitulation of Germany, in exchange of I don't know what, Stalin would have helped taking down Japan by invading Japan. The date was decided and was fixed, which was 3 months after the surrender of Germany. And in fact, Russia, Stalin did that, 3 months exactly by the day, by the hours, at midnight. Starting after the end of the war in Europe, had moved its army to Asia, and 3 days exactly after the signing of the surrender of Germany, invaded Manchuria in northern China, where there was a big part of the Japanese army. So the plan was to invade Japan from the north, the Russian, and from the south, the Americans, which had, of course, had to result that Japanese would get to Tokyo. Sorry, the Russian would get to Tokyo. So the end would have ended with the Russians being Berlin and Tokyo, and the Americans being Rome, which would have positioned Russia as the clear winner of the war, right? The majority, you should remember that the majority of the German army was destroyed by the Soviet, not by the Western Allied. The day in which Roosevelt was not there, was dead, was a new American president, heard about the super bomb, decided to use it. And at this point it's completely clear, not for taking down Japan, not for ending a war that would have clearly ended very shortly, but as avoiding the Russia going to Tokyo and positioning itself as the only country that had a super bomb and therefore dominated the planet. So the game was a power game in view of the future. And we have ample evidence that President US was totally convinced that this would have positioned the US to be the only nuclear power for a very, very long time, possibly forever. It was completely false, because the Russians got to nuclear weapons just a few years later, 3 or 4 years later. So the moral justification is undefendable. The historical events are quite different from the way they usually are related. I'm not revealing anything secret or anything. This is what is written in history books. It's just the difference between what is written in history book and what is commonly written in newspaper articles. And the game here has been control of the planet, not ending a war, saving life, or anything like that. One message of all that is that the motivations were wrong, the decision were a wrong result. What happened is different than what the US government expected. There were nuclear bomb development in Germany, and there was no establishment of a single superpower after. One of the things I do in the book is go ahead, and I'm not going to continue on that, and say how many of subsequent things have been actually caused by mistakes, error, and decisions, plans. I do that, so I'm stronger, blah, blah, and then things go differently.
Thank you. So, not defensive. We've heard that a lot, haven't we? It's, you know, for dominance and to dominate the world, but also the point that you're making about the fact that the US thought that it would come out of the Second World War as the dominant power, but quite quickly you still had, you know, the power of the Soviet Union. So I'm now going to move on to sort of the situation now. Obviously, I'm leaving a lot for people to ask questions, yeah. But your book makes many references to how the present is mirroring the past. So, for instance, how, you know, the huge armament in the lead up to the First World War is very similar to the situation now of rearmament escalating, accelerating across Europe. And you write, the problem of the present is not the past, for which we who live today are not responsible. It is the future for which we are, which I think is, you know, we do have to take responsibility for what's going on now, don't we? Can you talk about your views on, you know, how can we secure peace in Europe? You know, this is like such a critical situation in relation to the catastrophic kind of war in Ukraine. You know, certainly C&D feels that is still the area where there's most risk of, you know, nuclear weapons being used. So, you know, you do talk about this in the book, you know, how can we secure peace in Europe? And also, you know, how we need to find agreements instead of resolving issues by force, which, as you say, just lead to war. So really shifting things onto political leaders, you know, being seized of the fact that we need to talk, we need to come to agreements, rather than this, you know, preparing for war is our way of keeping us safe, which I don't think we any of us in this room feel safe. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually the reason for which I mean, the motivation of the book is that I am seriously worried and a bit scared by the kind of direction that seems to me Europe, and I mean mostly UK, France, Germany, are taking right now. I read what is going on as a direction which seems is taking us to war. And in addition of the fact that that's already a disasterful idea, let me put it this way, humans have been massacring each other regularly, including in Europe, for centuries, every once in a while. But now, thanks to my trade, theoretical physics, we have found a definitive way to massacre one another, because now there are nuclear weapons. So a serious war cannot avoid becoming nuclear, and a nuclear war, it's truly an existential risk for humankind. It means us being burned alive in a few minutes, and civilization, the planet falling down. So that's what we're talking about. And it seems to me that in spite of all the mistake, in spite of the craziness, in spite of all the war, since 45 to recently, there was a certain wisdom in the leadership. Because, I mean, remember the Cold War, those of you who were there, I'm 70. It was colossal ideological confrontation. There was a world split in two. Everybody wants to dominate the other and cancel the other. And yet, it was a lot of wisdom, thanks also to voice raised by scientists, by manifestos like Einstein and Russell one. Wisdom being, okay, but there are nuclear weapons, and the priority is avoid a nuclear confrontation, above anything else. And that motivated the START treaties, the intermediate range treaties, that motivated the backing up of both Soviet and the US during the Cuban crisis. So there was a sort of wisdom of we are fighting like dogs, but we're reasonable human beings and we don't do something completely stupid, which is go to war one with the other. Very simple. I mean, the Soviet Union did not go to war with the United States. The United States did not go to war with the Soviet Union. It's not perfect. It was war else, okay? It was not certainly an ideal war in any way. People were dying in Vietnam and everywhere else. But this direct confrontation and nuclear war was avoided by reasonable leadership with a certain amount of wisdom. I think this wisdom is being dissipated right now. I think this is not there. The awareness that we're playing with fire, literally, not metaphorically, is not there. Because when Europe react to the change of relation with the US and react to the totally stupid and criminal thing that Putin did in Ukraine, by saying, all right, now we have to become a military superpower, an independent military superpower, is playing rightly into the direction of the escalation that historians always take it to war, right? Before the First World War, right? The argument, we rearm so we avoid war, has never worked, okay? When there's big rearmament, like now, separation of economies, right now, not willing to depend on other critical things, like now, reciprocal demonization. So the other party is it's nasty, it's crazy, it's when there are these things, then you end up with a war. And so it seems to me we're going to that direction, and there are voices, but there are very few in Europe that say, wait a minute, the problem is not overpower the others. In the nuclear age, the problem is not to put yourself in a position of winning the next war. The problem is not to going into the next war. So the likelihood that Russia is really a direct threat for London or Berlin or Paris is ridiculous. I think it's just lovely. Russia cannot get to Kiev. Imagine if it can get to London. The reason Russia is aggressive is because it felt, whether right or wrong, that somebody else was aggressive against it. We are scared by Russia. Politicians are playing on the fear of Russia and presenting argument, look, did that, killed that person, true, killed that other person, true. I mean, how many people are wicked? It's our country killed. I mean, or our allied. So there is clearly a confrontation, there is clearly bad behavior from all sides, but there's no real threat of an aggression of Russia to Western Europe at all. There are problems, the Baltic, for instance. There's Ukraine, people die, young kids of Ukraine die, young Russians die. This problem can be solved if the mindset is we have to find a solution, we have to find a point of balance like the Kennedy and the Khrushchev were able to do at some point. What is making you afraid? That. What is making you afraid? That. Okay, well, here is a balance. Humans can be rational. Can't find solution. That doesn't seem what is happening right now. There is a narrative, let's get ready to war, let's make more weapons, make more powerful. The increase of military spending has been astonishing. 1 trillion military spending was added last year. This are numbers beyond imagination. This is taking away, of course, from all the rest of things that humankind needs. That seems to be a profoundly misguided direction, what Western European countries are taken, because nobody knows what to think. I mean, the relation with the United States has changed dramatically, there is this war. If you ask politicians today, and I wish everybody did, all right, so where do you think are we going 10 years in the future with Russia? Are we friends? Are we in a war? One of the two was destroyed, the other one? What is the view? Where is the answer? I don't hear the answer. The answer is, let's get stronger. I think, and then I've said everything I wanted to say, I'm happy to open to everybody if you want. I think that this has nothing to do with morality or ethics. I mean, I love Pope, Catholic Pope, who says, if you love Jesus, you don't go to war. Wonderful, I buy the ticket to buy the party. But rationality, independent of any morality, tell us that if we go to war, it's a disaster for both, everybody. We saw the First World War, right? We saw the Second World War, what happened. And it's much more miserable not going to war. Now, this was all past, but now it's 10 times more true, because there is no nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons change the game entirely. Russia has 4,000 H-bombs, one push of a finger away from destroying half of England and north of Italy, wherever there are atomic bombs pointing toward St. Petersburg or Moscow. And of course, this is the first place we're being hit, because when you feel in danger and you feel that everything is lost, you attack and you destroy. That's how humans behave, always. So why going into that direction? It seems to me that humankind need to realize that this is our planet. We have to live together, and we have to find ways to live together. And the solution is not become most powerful than anybody else and dominate the others. The solution is to finding compromises, finding ways to live together, accepting different point of view, and realizing that the others are theorists as we do. Especially since the West is not anymore in the position of dominating the world. Right? There was a time which, I'm Italian, but there was a time in which the UK, what was it, 80% of the world production was in the UK, economic production, industrial production, because of when the Industrial Revolution came out. So of course, I mean, then for a century, UK could dominate the world. Okay. And then there was a time in the West as a whole, Western Europe, Northern America, Australia, had 80% of global GDP. Okay, now it's less than 40%. Because history, you know, in balance, the progress develops, civilization grows everywhere. So this insistence, first of the US after winning the Cold War, so to say, and now, to a large extent, of the West as a whole, of saying we must be strong to impose our will and impose our ways, is just not sustainable. We have to, I think, live with the others and realize that the others, what they really want is not to dominate us. I mean, it would be nonsensical to think that the objective of the Russian leadership and the oligarchy dominating there is dominating Western Europe. I mean, come on. Russia has a GDP of Italy. The GDP of Russia is equal to the GDP of Italy. So there's no way they would dominate Europe. Okay? But they can defend themselves because they have 4,000 nuclear bombs, H-bombs. So can't we ask our politicians to be, not to look at last week and next week, but to look long term and think how we can live together on the planet?
Too true. I'm sure all of us here feel very frustrated about our political leaders and how terrible they are. And how we have to do something about it. Okay, so this is the opportunity now for people to ask their own questions of Carlo. And I'm going to come around with this very exciting looking microphone, if you don't mind. So yeah, if people want to indicate. Yeah, I've seen. All right.
Thank you. Thank you, Carlo. So my name's Michelle. I'm a former secondary maths teacher, and I remember when your book, 7 Brief Lessons of History, came out, and it was just magnificent. And I remember people reading it on the tube, so I was really excited to see you speaking here today on this new book. And I'm now actually a non-violence trainer and organiser for mass civil disobedience and direct action groups. I hope it's okay, I'm going to read my question out because I'm nervous. So it's clear in your book that there is the moral conscience position in individual physicists having the influence on the nuclear bomb, well, in Germany, not happening, and also the pressure for scientists and physicists in particular to follow this moral conscience position through modern day. And also the collective need to overcome the unmotivated, irrational fear of each other. So we sit here today quite powerfully and symbolically in the CND office, and one of the co-founders was the mathematician and philosopher Bertrand Russell. He was also involved in the Committee of 100, which has the biggest mass arrest days in modern UK protest history. And there were many other academics that were involved in the early days of CND. Your book has no mention on protest or a call to action towards mass protest and how we can take this forward together. And there were huge protests in the years leading up to the Cuban Missile Crisis, and we know that the protest movements against war are the biggest protests that we see across the world. So what role do you feel both mass civil disobedience and what role leading scientists and academics, being at the forefront of these protest movements, can play at this crucial time, particularly against the US military and imperialism and these wars against aggression that they've been doing for the last 50 or so, 70 years? And how can we activate these scientists as well?
I wish I could answer to that. I'm not good in answering this question. Not because I think it doesn't have an answer, because I'm not good in answering this question. So I've been an intellectual all my life. I've been deeply attracted by political issues and thinking about this. But I'm not a politician, I'm not an organizer, I'm not somebody who can move people. That's why I think organization like this one and the others. But one phrase that I have in my book is, which comes from my youth and the political engagement of my youth, is let's everybody do what they're better, what they can. Those who can speak, please speak. Those who can write, write. Those who can organize, organize. Those who can fight, fight. I think we need our voice to be heard. We need to bring people together. We have to convince politicians. I think the countries as a whole should see, because we are doing something wrong, I think. The two manifestos that you mentioned at the beginning, the Einstein 1914-13 and Einstein-Russell and others 40, sorry?
1955.
55, thank you, also was later. They were remarkable, different in the impact they had. The second one, in my opinion, had a long but strong impact. That voice was heard. Bookish movement came out of that. People went in the streets. I saw on your website photos of demonstration in the 50s with a huge amount of people who were saying, "Oh, we don't want to nuclear war." Very simple. I mean, this is, and the voice that came out because people knew how to do that. Einstein, before the First World War, which in a sense was even more obviously right. Einstein, before the First World War, just a few years, a year before or two, said, "Come on, Europe, are we stupid? I mean, we have to make a suicide here if we go to war in Europe in this way." And was obviously right. Anybody a generation later would say, "Yes, of course. Why didn't people hear?" Nobody heard. It was a clearly written manifesto for the Europeans, message to the Europeans. The reason for which what was going on was stupid. On political ground and moral ground, the people was addressed to, not on higher moral ground. And yet nobody heard. So I don't know how should we play like the second or the first. I have no answer, but I hope you guys have, or other people guys have. I do my part. I know how to write a short book and try and say, look, here is a problem. Please do, please act.
I mean, I thought about that as well in terms of, you know, you had philosophers at that time, you know, who were taking direct action. But I think it's also, you know, that was the 50s. That was only like 5 years, 10 years max after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was totally in people's consciousness, wasn't it? But also you had this huge nuclear arms race, you know, like hundreds of nuclear bombs were being exploded all the time, you know. So it was this sort of heightened time, and we know that unfortunately we're dragging towards that, aren't we? So it's our job, isn't it, to get all those people taking part in non-violent direct action. And I think people are doing that now around the genocide, because they totally see people are, you know, being killed in horrific ways, like right in front of them. So yeah, it's really critical that we make those links and build that work. Right, over to you.
Thanks. Thanks. I'm Albert Beale from Peace News editorial board. My particular interest is, as somebody who studied physics but then gave up and became an activist and didn't manage to combine the two as you have, is that when I saw this book, and it's obviously about in a sense, the conscience of a physicist being involved in the area of science which has produced these horrific weapons. But I'm also aware from what you wrote, something you wrote in Corriere della Sera 10 years ago, about how when you were on the run from the police in your student days, it was to do with not a particular weapon, but supporting resistance to conscription, which then existed in Italy. So clearly your background was a more fully pacifist, anti-militarist one, as well as being concentrating particularly on your own kind of intellectual responsibility in terms of nuclear resistance. And having had 2 minutes to flick through this book before you started speaking, it looks as though you're still hinting at that perspective in the final pages of this book. And so I'm very interested to hear what your current views are on the balance between opposing particular weapons and taking a more rejection of warfare at a much more fundamental level, and how you balance those as campaigning priorities.
Good question.
Yeah, thank you for the question, which has different levels also in it. Yes, definitely there's a continuity between me not willing to do compulsory military service that existed at the time in Italy, and current engagement. And also there is a direct connection between the specific worry about the nuclear weapons and the danger of nuclear weapons, which I think is existential, is sort of overwhelming everything else, and the idea that we could do without war, and we better do without war. So much more wide. I'm not sure if pacifism is the right way. I don't want to describe myself a pacifist. I don't know. I could imagine that there is some reason in which you take a gun and with a group of friends and do something. I don't know. It's not just a moral position. Is that so? Where am I going? I grew up in a moment in which a part of my generation felt very strongly a rejection of the idea that we have to live in a tribal thing in which is us against the other. And grew up with pretty naturally, perhaps because of the vicinity of the tragedy of the Second World War, or in fact the Two World War. 100 million humans were killed doing. Perhaps because other things were happening, or perhaps we were kids in a rich country and being privileged, I don't know. But the dream of possibility of thinking ourselves, humankind, as a single tribe, a single family, which with shared problems, which fight like brothers fight, but without remembering that there is common destiny, a common advantage, common problems before the individual or the group interest was very much part of the way I grew up. And in a sense, I'm still there. I'm still there. I do think that we have learned one way or the other to live, not massacre each other within countries, right? Within UK, more or less, there's a civilization pact that we're relatively safe. I never understood why we cannot do this between countries, okay, around the planet. Why can't we do the same thing? Just create a civilization pact where we resolve conflicts in other ways. I have never felt myself as an Italian before being a human being. Of course I'm an Italian, look, my hands are going around. I'm culturally Italian. I'm European, of course I'm European. Okay, I'm Western, and I grew up in a Catholic country. I grew up in a Greek civilization, etc., etc. But I never saw a boundary between me and my group against the Russian, the Chinese, or the Germans, or whoever. And I come from a country that was fascist for 20 years before the war. In fact, invented fascism, because Germany and Spain and South American dictatorship were inspired by Mussolini. And the core of fascism is we against the other. War is good, we are. And for me, has always been profoundly distasteful, crazy, and stupid, rationally stupid. So I'm the same person. In that, I'm the same person. Of course, I became a scientist. I'm 70 now. I'm much less idealistic than when I was 20. I see the complexity of the world. I see the complexity of things. But I still think that we should not think as in this tribal way of belonging to a nation, to a country, to a group, against another one. And the nuclear issue seems to me that, on the one hand, it's particularly urgent because the risk is real. You probably all know the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which evaluate the risk, in 2025 evaluated that it had never been so high since the beginning. And in 2026, the size is even higher. That's where the title of the booklet comes from. So it's a direct thing. Nuclear weapons should be a first concern, I think, in political decision. But also, nuclear weapons, precisely for this reason, bring us home very clearly the fact that common interests are more important than the interest of your own country. I mean, not having a nuclear war, it's an interest of humankind as a whole that is much higher than being a little bit more powerful, less powerful your own country. So the two things go very much together, in my opinion.
Thank you. I think that's such a powerful point, isn't it, at the end there, in terms of, it's all in our common interest for nuclear weapons not to be used. And just to slightly hog the mic, people might have been at the anti-war summit that took place on Saturday, where you had really, really powerful speeches from both Ukrainian and Russian conscientious objectors, campaigning for Russian people who have defected, that they should have refugee rights to be able to enter Europe, and their view, these are young men primarily working together, saying this is our way, we feel, of helping to try and bring about the end of the Ukraine war, and I think that that's incredibly powerful. And as you say, you can be opposed to war because you don't want millions of people killed, but also because it's nuclear weapons get used in war. They're not used in some abstract sort of situation over there. That's when they're going to get used. So it's absolutely critical to be sort of trying to stop wars, and particularly trying to sort of stop the war in Ukraine now. We've got some more time, so if anybody has got any more questions that they would like to ask Carlo, now is the time. Yeah.
My name is Guy Atkins. I'm an artist and researcher. Could you talk a bit more about your use of the word rational? Because I think that we were talking there about the nation state and how often leaders, politicians will use the word rational in the interests of the nation state. I wondered if you thought, or you could talk about how that differs for you as a physicist, and how you think we could disturb the common usage in the public domain of the word rational in the interests of economic growth, the nation state's immediate interests.
Thanks. Thanks for bringing this up. I often mention the rational perspective because, of course, I share the moral condemnation of war. Okay, I do, is a part of me. The ethical idea that I go kill somebody else or somebody else go kill somebody else. But there is a weakness, political weakness, in just centering everything on that, because the common reaction I get, and I think many of us get if we talk in this term, is yeah, of course, it would be nice if we were all good, but no, there are these nasty people, the only thing is to kill them. I mean, this is because otherwise, they kill us. So who cares about this moral thing? You just do want to be killed. So the point I want to make is that it is, independently of any moral reason, it is rational to not to go to war and not have war for all parts. And it has been so, not always, but most of the time in history. Now, to your question specifically about, well, that's what the politicians say, that it's rational to do that for the good of the country. But it's the second part which I'm questioning, because rationality is not close in itself. Is rational rationality is about the means to achieve some goals. If the goal is the immediate good of the country, then this might conflict with another goal, which is the long-term good of the country, right? If I want to eat sugar, it's rational to run out and eat a lot of sugar. Of course, it is. That's a rational thing to do if I want to eat sugar. But then maybe it's more rational to say, wait, I'm eating too much sugar, I don't. Right? It's just looking a little bit ahead. It's just a silly example, but it's so what I'm pointing out is that the rational argument based on the advantage of my own country is not rational if you think a little bit in long terms. Wessex and Mercia were fighting in the past of England and war with one another. Am I pronouncing it right? Probably not. Different part of the United Kingdom, a different part of England, where a small little state killing one another and war to one another. And it was rational for one of them trying to win, but isn't it more rational to live together in England and not killing one another? Of course it is. So rationality can be played at different levels and with different larger terms vision. And I'm just saying, look, the larger term vision, the rationality of the larger term vision is sufficient to tell us that, right now for Europe, doing something that increased the likelihood of a war with Russia, it's completely silly. That's the relation between the different things for me.
Thank you. Okay. Have we got anybody else would like to ask a question? Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't formulated it properly. I'll give it a go. I think it's on two levels. You were talking about nations have fear. You talk about fear. And I suppose what I wonder at one level is, in the people who lead the nations, is that fear do they actually have that fear themselves? Are they that paranoid? Or are they just creating it for us? I know there probably isn't an answer, but I was thinking about the Iraq War and the weapons of mass destruction that never existed, and hand-split, and it still all went ahead. So there's that level. And the level for activism for me is that fear is irrational, and most of our arguments are rational, and the two don't meet. There's something missing. So I don't know if you've got any suggestions for how we can approach dispelling that fear, not just with rational argument. How can we have an emotional impact and a psychological impact?
Your first question, this morning I had breakfast with a person who is in the House of Lords, and I asked this question to him, exactly this question, exactly this. I don't know the answer. We hear in the press, in the media, in discourse, arguments about why we should fear Russia. Okay, we do. And I asked the question, is the leadership of this country using these arguments for some reason, because they want to convince people it's good to put money in armament, or they really are afraid of that? I don't know the answer. I really don't know the answer. I do know for sure, there is a story which is often heard, I don't know if it is true or not, which about Goering, the Nazi, one of the Nazi leaders, during the Nuremberg trials was asked how does the Nazi leadership convince the German people to be so ready to die in war for Hitler? And the answer was, oh, it's very easy. Every government knows the answer to that. You can turn people in wonderful fighter, but just telling them how much they have to fear an enemy. And one thing I often say is that if you read Mein Kampf by Hitler, it doesn't say we Germans are the best and dominate the world. It says we Germans have been, we have lost the First World War, we've been squeezed by the other powers, we've been squeezed more and more. They're trying to destroy us. Be afraid. The only way to react to that is to make the folk, the people, stick together and be stronger than the others. So in other words, fear, it's obviously used constantly by a leadership when it wants to get somewhere. And the weapons of mass destructions of Saddam Hussein, I mean, it's just, are they hypocrite or stupid? And I tend to think that we're not so stupid, because come on, I mean, it's just seen today. I mean, really, we were supposed to be afraid of Iraq. I mean, just come on. Iraq has a GDP not of Italy, but of Sicily. So I mean, what's the point? And yet they succeeded in scaring a lot of people. Oh my God, this guy is. So is the same happening with Russia? I think to some extent yes, but I don't know to which extent, and to which extent really there is a worry about it. I really don't know. About the second part, how to address these sentiments and the relation between. I mean, fear by itself is not an irrational thing, right? It's just we are.
Especially if you've got something to be afraid of.
Yeah, especially if you're something that. I mean, if you're walking in the savannah and a lion comes in, you're scared to death, and that's good because then you run, you do things, you just put all the adrenaline jumps out. We are designed to have fear for good reasons, biological. But it's also true that a lot of things that we're designed to do biologically, it's much better for control than we have rational. Sometimes I get horrendously angry or something, I want to kill this person, but then a part of me says, no, don't. Don't say anything, wait, calm down, and then think about it. So, yes, I think it's been used by politicians. I don't know because I don't understand the leadership of how actual this decision has been taken. But I think that what we need is and I don't see it enough, an open public discussion about these things. I mean, it's minister resigns because there's no money in this country, because there's not enough money for military, and then the government, the prime minister resign. I mean, is there overall clean discussion about how much money should this country should put into weapons and nuclear weapons, and how are we thinking about, because this is all about Russia, so about our long-term relation with Russia in the past. I think we need this kind of discussion.
Yeah. Okay. So that's thank you so much, Carlo. So much for us to think about. And it's good space to be able to think deeply about things, especially as an activist. So much of the time you're just like, oh, we've got to do this thing now. So it's been a real absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. Also, thank you so much, as I say, for writing this absolutely fantastic book.